Why would you marry someone like her? Helen's voice cut through the air with a piercing edge, her eyes scanning her son's face as if she were trying to read him, dissecting him down to the core. She leaned forward, her coffee cup barely touching the saucer, lips curled in a way that made it clear she wasn't asking for advice. She was making a statement. It was a Saturday morning. The streets were bustling with the usual weekend crowd, the hum of traffic mixing with the chatter from cafes, creating a familiar buzz. The sun hung lazily above, casting long shadows along the sidewalk. I was sitting outside my usual cafe, savoring my breakfast while my dog rested calmly beside me, his massive frame taking up most of the space at table number 1. Across from me, at table number 3, a scene was unfolding, one I wasn't expecting but couldn't ignore. There, under the soft morning light, a woman, who I guessed was in her 50s, was having an intense conversation with her son. She looked sharp and polished, a woman who clearly took pride in her appearance. Her son, however, was the opposite. Early 30s, plain in every way, neither tall nor short, average build, his clothes unremarkable, his posture slightly slouched. I couldn't help but notice how quiet he seemed, almost shrinking under the weight of her words. The conversation started off innocuously enough, small talk about work, how the weather had been. But soon, the tone shifted. Helen's voice rose, no longer speaking in pleasant tones. I could hear her words more clearly now. You know how I feel. I just think you could do better. Honestly, she paused, letting her words hang in the air like a heavy fog. She's just so different. I always thought you and Sarah would make such a lovely pair. Why can't you just meet her? The young man, her son, shifted in his seat, eyes fixed downward, avoiding her gaze. He fidgeted with his coffee cup, picking at the napkin on the table. His body language screamed discomfort, but he didn't respond. Instead, he sat there, stiff and silent, while his mother kept talking, each word laced with judgment and disdain. I felt a wave of empathy for him, a quiet frustration growing as I observed this mother trying to dictate every aspect of her son's life, particularly his relationship with his wife. It was clear she didn't approve of Sarah, and as much as he might have disagreed, he wasn't saying a word. I couldn't help but lean in a little, straining to hear every word. She was relentless. And I just don't get it, Stephen. I've told you I don't like the way she's so independent. It's one thing to have a partner, but she's always so busy with her own thing. I just want you to see that you deserve someone more like. That was when the shift happened. For the first time since they sat down, Stephen looked up. His face was expressionless, his eyes cold, but I could feel a quiet storm building. He took a slow sip from his coffee, wiped his mouth carefully with his napkin, and placed it back on the table with deliberate calmness. His hand trembled slightly, but his voice? It was like ice. Clear, firm, and calm. "Mom," he began, the word coming out more like a warning than an address. "I've been very clear about this. I don't understand how you could possibly be in any doubt about how I feel." He paused, his eyes narrowing just slightly. "This is my wife and the mother of my child you are talking about." Helen froze, the words seemingly catching in her throat. For a brief moment, I thought she might try to brush it off, maybe change the subject. But Stephen wasn't having it. "I will not tolerate the lack of respect you're showing her," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "When you disrespect her, you disrespect child," he said, leaning forward just enough to emphasize the word, "and you disrespect me." Helen's face reddened, her eyes narrowing, but she didn't speak. She was still, as if waiting for him to back down, to soften the blow. But he didn't. Instead, he stood up, his chair scraping against the pavement as he moved with a quiet but undeniable confidence. "Let me make myself crystal clear," he said, the words now slow and deliberate. "Until you pull your head in and apologize sincerely to both me and the woman I love, you have no possible part to play in our life, or child's life." With that, Stephen placed his napkin on the table, gave one last look at his mother, who was now sitting there, mouth agape, eyes wide, and turned to walk away. I sat there, utterly stunned. For a moment, I wasn't sure if this was real or if I had just witnessed a dramatic scene from a movie. Helen stared at his empty chair for a long time, her hands folded tightly in her lap. It was as if the air had shifted, as if the tables had been turned in a way she never anticipated. I watched as he walked out of the cafe, his posture straight, his movements resolute. There was a sense of finality in the way he left, as though he was shedding a weight he'd carried for far too long. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of triumph for him. Helen, on the other hand, was left in her seat, speechless. Her face alternated between disbelief and frustration, her hands twitching like she was about to say something, anything, but no words came out. As I sat there reflecting on the moment, I began to think about the larger dynamics at play. Stephen was in his late 20s, married to Sarah for nearly 2 years. They had been high school sweethearts, and while their relationship had been through the ups and downs of growing up, it had always been rooted in mutual respect and understanding. But Sarah, strong and independent, had never been the type of person to easily fit into the mold Helen had envisioned for her son. Helen had always been the center of Stephen's world, controlling, always stepping in where she didn't belong. From the moment Stephen and Sarah got together, Helen had made her disapproval clear. She had tried to set him up with other women she deemed more suitable, more appropriate for him, though none of them ever measured up to her standards. It wasn't that she didn't want him to be happy, it was that she wanted him to be happy on her terms. And Sarah, to her credit, never shrank back. She stood her ground, made it clear that her place in Stephen's life was not up for negotiation, but Helen wasn't the type of person to let go easily. I had heard whispers around town, how Helen would show up uninvited at their house, how she'd criticize Sarah for being too busy with work, how she'd make little snide comments about Sarah's cooking, or how she decorated their home. There were always undercurrents of judgment in everything she did, but Stephen had never truly confronted it until today. I didn't stick around much longer. As the conversation had unfolded, I had realized just how pivotal this moment was for Stephen. For years, he had let his mother dominate his relationships, let her opinions guide his decisions, and let her control the narrative of his life. But now, for the first time, he had spoken up, not just for himself, but for his wife and child. In that one powerful statement, Stephen had done something I hadn't expected. He had set a boundary. And not just any boundary, a boundary that could change the course of his relationship with his mother, his wife, and maybe even with himself. I left the cafe feeling oddly hopeful. The world outside was the same. Cars honking, people walking by, the usual urban hum, but something had shifted in the air, like the start of a new chapter. It's easy to feel trapped by family dynamics, to let the expectations of others dictate your choices, but today, Stephen had reminded me that sometimes, breaking free means standing your ground, even when it's hard. He had chosen his family, not just the one he was born into, but the one he had created with Sarah. And in doing so, he had shattered the quiet tyranny of his mother's control. As I walked down the street, I found myself thinking about the power of choice, the power to speak up when silence would have been easier, the power to stand tall when all you've known is crouching in the shadow of someone else's will. And as for Helen, I'm sure she would find a way to twist this event in her favor, but for now, I knew the ball was in her court. She could either continue down the path of resentment and control, or she could learn to respect the family she had once tried to dominate. But that was a decision for another day. Today, the winds had shifted. And for the first time in a long time, Stephen's voice had been the one that carried.